I will call the roll for the planning commission and establish a quorum. Kevin Harnett, Sam Tarara, Diane Brown,
Here.
Paul Barbahan, present. 3 out of 4 makes a quorum. The only item on the agenda tonight is the presentation of the draft of the comprehensive plan. So there's nothing to be voted on, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to our administrator, and we will go from there.
Hi, everyone. I think I know almost everyone in the room, but thank you guys for coming out tonight. It's, we're nearing the end of a very long process. Certainly, the process doesn't happen without your input. I don't want it to stop last month. I want it to continue tonight. So, most importantly, I want you to be comfortable speaking and participating. We want to get your comments. This, after all, is not my plan or the village council's plan. It's all of your plan. It's the people who live in Forest Park. We've been very careful all along to kind of be sitting on the sidelines and letting the consultants and you folks put together what's come forward so far. I want you to keep in mind that what you're seeing tonight is a draft. And frankly, it stays in draft form all the way up until the council approves it on December 15th. That's sort of the plan. And I'll sort of take you just quickly through the schedule. We're to sit and talk about this tonight. And if you guys participate and stay awake, we will keep you here till 9 o'clock. But Paul has made it pretty clear that at 9 o'clock we should be able to be through this document and be on our way. After tonight, I don't anticipate that you'll be done thinking about this yet. It's not our goal to have you done thinking about it yet. I want you to have another, I think we've figured 7 days, like November 10th probably, right in there, to give us any more feedback. And the best way for us to take that feedback is via the online portal at www.pictureforestpark.net. If for some reason that doesn't work for you, email me, email Janet, and they'll give you all their information here in a little bit. Joel and anybody, get us the comments you want. We'll get those put into the draft document again that the Plan Commission, you folks, will see on the 17th of November. So theoretically, we've got 14 days, 2 weeks to receive comments. Now, as I said, I want most of them by the 10th so I can get them into a final document, because on the 17th, the Plan Commission will approve, again, another draft. The Village Council will see it for the first time on November 24th. And frankly, they'll see a very similar presentation to what you folks are going to see tonight, shortened down and a bit more concise. And of course, we'll be asking comments from the council then. They'll see it first time on the 24th and then presumably pass it on December 15th, which is our only meeting in December. Again, thank you. Be engaged. I'll introduce Janet now from Images. And she'll kind of take you through the program that she's going to do. But I want you to understand it's a working meeting. Talk all you want. Ask all the questions you want. Take all the comments you want. And understand that this is a working document. If we finished everything tonight, or frankly, if we finished everything on the 15th, it is not cast in stone. It evolves, and it will continue to evolve just like the last one did. So, again, thanks, and Janet, it's all on you.
Thanks, Tim. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. We're very excited to be here tonight, excited to present the draft document to you. I think that we've all spent a lot of time working on this and moving forward, talking to all of you, getting a lot of comments in, and I think we have got a really good document to present to you today. I'd like to start with some introductions. Again, I'm Janet Henderson with the Images team. I have some of my team members with me this evening.
I'm Leslie Kirschler-Owen. I'm Jan Ward.
I'm Amanda Leonard. In addition to folks from Images, we also had other consultants on our team with us. We had Sam Schwartz Engineering, who provided the transportation analysis for us, and Valerie Kretschmer and Associates, who did the market analysis. We also have been in communication with Joellen and Tim from the village, making sure that we're keeping on track. And then most importantly, we've been in communication with you, the Plan Commission, the steering committee, and members of the public, just to get information and to find out what you really wanted this plan to be. And so you're very important to us in this process, and so I'd like to go around and do self-introductions with your guests this evening.
Sam Lar.
Here's a printed black and white.
He's got 3 kids, 9, 8, and been pretty active in town here over the last few years. Radford Commissioner didn't win, but figured I'd kind of get back to this. So decided from Red's thing, a lot of good stuff. Lots of information.
There's a lot of information.
Bob Pax, resident, and new career in urban planning. This is my second round of planning. Participation in this week.
Paul Barbanek, Chair of the Planning Commission, resident since 1985, married to a lifer, and very new real estate work. Good enough. What do you?
Diane Brown, member of the Plan Commission. I moved to Forest Park in 2012, but I've been a resident in a very nearby community for a very long period of time. So I've known this community for now a couple of years. And that's good.
That's great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Roger Braden, I'm the library director.
Trudy Rasmus, I'm a resident, long-time resident. Also, I'm with the library, I'm trustee on the library board, and I work for Avenue 1 Realty Group here in Forest Park, also in a realtor.
Jennifer Wolf, 14-year resident. Was on the recreation board for 6 years, and before that, I was started the Friends of the Dog Park group. So I've been an active and concerned citizen for many years.
My name is Carrie Davis. I've been a resident of Forest Park for 4 years now, and I'm a member of the city. I'm Erin Watson. I've been a resident for 10 years, and I'm vice chair.
Ralph DeFebo, I've been a resident since about 1985. Worked at the assessor's office for 30 years and just an active citizen.
I'm Jill Wagner. I've lived here for 13 years. I have 2 children, both at the local schools, one at the Forest Park Middle School and one at Betsy Ross. I live at the south end of town, and I have been involved with the Forest Park Cub Scout group.
I'm Jason Faber, I'm a resident here for 12 years.
Are you introducing the steering committee or just
I would
anyone?
like everybody that's here to introduce themselves.
My name is Kathleen Gray, and I am the new administrator at the Alton Hine.
Hello, Jill.
Hello, Kathleen.
My name is Jean Riley, and I'm president of the board at the Alton Hine. Been on the board there for 25 years.
My name is Ellen Chavez. I'm part of the steering committee. Been a resident in Forest Park for 8 years.
My name is Stephen Backman, and I'm a resident of Forest Park. Thank you.
In the back row?
Jean Lotus, Forest Park Review.
Hi, I'm Alex Silva. I've been a resident of Forest Park for 27 years and counting.
Back up to the front.
Oh, hey, sorry I'm late. I'm Michael Smith. I bought my house, my wife and I bought our house here in 2001. 2 kids in the school system, been involved with Scouts and Westwood YMCA and park district.
Great, well, thank you, everybody. It's good to see so many of you back that have been participating. We really appreciate all of your input. What we're going to do today is we're going to give you a quick overview of the comprehensive plan process, and then we're going to present to you the draft plan. And that's where we want to spend most of our time so that we can get your feedback on the recommendations that we have in this document. As we go through that, we will pause at different sections to ask for discussion and comments on those individual sections so we can kind of keep our discussions focused. But feel free to raise your hand, or if you have a thought or comment at different places. And we want to keep this open and interactive to make sure that we get the best dialogue that we can this evening. And And then I'll talk about the next steps and the approval process. I think that Tim's already covered a lot of that, but we'll go through that one more time. So the comprehensive plan process, what is it? It's very important to remember that this is really a vision for the community. It's a working document that contains recommendations and policies for the vision that we have set forth for Forest Park. It's really a framework for the development and investment decisions that the village will be making for the next 10 years. So this is a guide to be used. It is not specific details that can't be changed. It's something for them to reference back as we move forward making decisions for the village for the coming years. So there are several steps to take to putting this document together. The first was inventory and analysis. Then we did a lot of public involvement. Then we drafted the plan document, and that's where we're at now. We're here to get your feedback on this document, and then we'll be putting it together into a final plan. We started with inventory and analysis, and this is really an inventory of the existing documents and plans that the village has already put in place, and then also a visual inventory of everything that's in the village, including the land uses, the transportation facilities that you have, the community facilities, the parks and recreation facilities, and that really goes into the existing conditions report that Jan will speak about in a minute. Public involvement was a huge process that we undertook for this plan. Again, this is your document, it's your plan, it's what you want to see for the village for the coming years. So we wanted to make sure that we got out and we talked to you multiple times. We started out by having a first public meeting to introduce you to the plan, to tell you that it was going to be taking place. Then we held some workshops where we talked about vision, goals, and objectives. We followed that up with visioning workshops, where many of you attended, and you talked about what you want to see for the future of Forest Park. And to go along with those visioning workshops, we also had an online platform where you could go and you could upload pictures of things maybe you've seen in other communities or in your travels, make comments of other things that you might like to see for Forest Park. In addition to that, we did 2 surveys, one for residents and one for businesses. And we also conducted significant one-on-one interviews with key stakeholders in the community, as well as all of the village board members. Steering committee members, if you were at our last meeting, you would have received this document that highlights all of the public involvement and outreach efforts that took place. Extra copies here tonight. If somebody didn't get one or would like a copy of this, make sure our plan commission has a copy of this. And as Tim mentioned, this is still an ongoing process. We still want to hear from you. Today is one of those opportunities that we really want to hear your comments and your thoughts on the draft document that you have in front of you. So that leads us into the draft comprehensive plan. The main chapters of this document include demographics, existing conditions, vision, goals, and objectives, recommendations, and implementation strategies and funding. With that, let's talk a little bit about demographics.
So, just as you're wanting to get a sense of who is here tonight, it's also important to understand who lives in Forest Park. Who are you guys? What races are out there? What languages do you speak? How old are the kids? How many seniors do we have? So, in order to start this, what we did is gathered up quite a bit of information, utilizing typical sources, everything from the U.S. Census Bureau, so starting with the 2000 and 2010 census reports, and then also looking ahead into the future. So you might be thinking, okay, why do we really need to know what's going on in the future based on projections? Our best bet is when you understand the community that you're starting from and who it is that we're actually working with and who we're working for, you get a sense of how to plan ahead. So what you'll also notice in the document is that we did put in some projections for the years 2014 and 2019. Now, I know a lot of you are very data-driven, just as I am, which is why I'm doing this part here. I just want to get into a little bit of the sources In order to do those projections, we also utilize Esri data. And this is in part coming from our economic development studies, looking at how the retail market is in Forest Park. So Valerie Kretschmer and Associates pretty much led this portion of the plan, and in conjunction with us to create a whole sense of what's going on in Forest Park. So one of the sources that we used was Esri. Is anyone familiar with that data source? I got one, two. All right, so what Esri is it is a data service where they aggregate data. So they're pulling from the 2010 census as the baseline, and then using things like annual growth rates, trends in surrounding communities, trends in the county, as well as the state, and then again nationally. And that's how they sort of aggregate where the data should go and how to actually look ahead into the future. So just again, I wanted to give you guys a sense of that. I know quite a few people want to know where that data comes from. And like I said, it is sort of a good place to start. We need to know what this community is going to look like in the future in order to put ahead those policies and recommendations. That all being said, we got to look a little bit backwards here.
And in order to plan for the future, we have to look at what is present. What are the existing conditions? And get a baseline idea of what's in the village. And what are, once we get that idea, then we can decide what are the opportunities that you have. So we looked at 5 main categories. We looked at the zoning districts, the land uses, the different land uses, and the development patterns throughout the village. We also looked at your transportation networks, your transit facilities and services, your roadway networks, your bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as your parking and your traffic conditions. We also looked at the community facilities and services, such as the schools, the municipal buildings and services, then finally we looked at your parks and your natural resources. We looked at the park district facilities as well as your community parks. And it's very hard to read the land use manual, so you can see that you have a diverse mix of desirable land uses. Some of your strengths are your transit networks. You have CTA, these services and facilities. You have access to Metro services, and you have direct access to IT-90, which gives you access to the city of Chicago, direct access to the city of Chicago, as well as some of the suburban communities, and also access to O'Hare and Wood Airport. We have a very good park district, and let's see. We also have access to the forest, access to the forest preserve and the Display District Park.
So Jan just explained a little bit about what Forest Park is and what you have. Now I want to talk about where we want to go, what the vision is for the future. And this really leads into what I mentioned earlier when we held the Vision, Goals, and Objectives workshop. And we came up with topics really for each one of these categories. In land use, what we heard a lot of you saying was that it's important to promote development initiatives, that you'd like to preserve the characteristics that you currently have in your housing markets, and that you also want to have a diverse but mixed housing market. When we talked about economic development, it was very important to you to expand the tax base, as well as to attract a diverse mix of businesses to the village. In transportation, everyone here seems very excited and pleased to have the network of public transportation that you have available, the Blue Line, the Green Line, access to 290, and the multiple pace routes that you have here through the village. Regarding the community facilities, we heard a lot that you like the public services, the facilities that are available, that you appreciate the services that the village has in place, and because they take such good care of you, we would like them to continue doing that and to continue building on that to offer you even more services. The other thing we heard was that sometimes you have a problem with flooding in the village, and I think it's important to move forward to address those stormwater sewer issues and really come up with a better system to help the village in that regard. Everyone here really enjoys your parks and recreation areas. We heard time and again that open space and green space is very important to everyone here, and to have facilities available for that, and that you really wanted to enhance and maintain your cultural, historic, and natural resources. And those are the things that really were the building block, your visions that we used to come up with our recommendations. So, how do we get there? Where do we go with those visions?
So here's the part that I know you all are waiting for. I can see everyone's face, grabbing your plan, getting ready to go. So the way I'm going to set this up a little bit so you understand, I want to leave time for everyone to have some conversation about the various topics. But as you know, with a lot of people in the room and everyone wanting to say stuff, that gets a little tough sometimes. So what we've done is we've designed this in such a way that I'll give you all a brief summary of some of the major points in our recommendations. Amanda's going to show us some different pages if we need to go there. And also that way, you guys don't have to flip furiously through your booklets to see exactly where I'm headed. Sound like a plan? Didn't mean that, didn't it? Sort of iconic, right? But to begin with, we did look at zoning. So I'm sort of starting in that land use section. And that is one of our biggest sections of the plan, is looking at land use. And that's so important because that sets forth how the future of the village is going to look in terms of what uses are going to be in the village, as well as how those uses are going to be regulated. So that's one of those tough concepts, and I don't want to get into too much of the planning jargon, but we did look at the zoning ordinance. The zoning is the way that we regulate the land uses. Now, when we look at it in terms of a comprehensive plan, we're not looking at it as an overhaul of the zoning regulations. What instead we were looking for is how do the current zoning regulations fit with what we're proposing for the future land use. And in your plan, you'll see that there is a future land use map showing you what types of things we're looking forward to. We've also heard a lot of feedback about non-conforming uses. What a non-conforming use is, in the simplest sense, is having like a multi-unit building in a single-family area. Or in some locations, you might see a building that's only 1 or 2 stories next to something that's 7 stories. So it's looking at those different types of things and seeing how everything fits together. I also have fencing standards up here. Now, we have fencing standards to sort of represent the overall idea of maintenance. And so we provided quite a few recommendations in the plan to look at how the aesthetics of Forest Park are. We have a wonderful community, and so many people tell us all the great things about the character and the pride in the community. So we're taking that one step further and giving some solid recommendations of how to maintain that and how to keep that going. So again, a little bit more on the zoning. We did again look at all the land uses in conjunction with the regulations to see what makes sense, where it's heading, do we need to change something to make it work a little bit better, but also what happens if a building burns down? What happens, hopefully it doesn't, but if there's a force of nature that comes through and changes the composition of Forest Park, we need to look at all of those things. We were also looking at specific corridor plans. We know there's Madison Street, which is a great pride of the community as well, but looking at some of those other areas like Harlem and Roosevelt Road, what can we do there? So for instance, on Roosevelt Road, sometime in the future, the U.S. Postal Service site or the Army grant site might become available. What do we do with it? How do we look forward to that? So in the plan, you'll see that we've adapted some of those uses to mixed-use commercial, looking ahead again to that future. On this slide, we have all of the different land uses. This is based on both the existing land use map as well as the future land use map. I'm not going to read all of these, but this is to sort of set up where I'm going to take you guys next. So we are going to go through each of these, some in greater detail than the others, based on the feedback that we have from all of our public workshops, public meetings, as well as working with the village staff, seeing what their feedback is. You guys are the ones that have a lot of the knowledge that helps us to come up with what happens next. This slide I know is going to stir up some conversation, and I hope it does. One of the goals of this plan was to specifically look at two properties, the Altenheim and the Des Plaines. It's right across from Village Hall. So you might be wondering, why is it under residential? We did a market analysis of this, and from a strict marketing sense, we heard everyone say open space, but from that perspective, we really saw residential uses. So in the plan, you'll see three different options. One is to maintain it as open space, which then will require the village to continue to pay against the lien. You will see a mixture of residential and open space, and primarily with the residential, we're talking single family, either zero lot line or attached, such as townhomes. And then the third option is just straight residential, which of course it's always nice to have that mixture as well. Looking at the Des Plaines Avenue property, again, we looked at residential uses. That's what makes sense, again, from that strict market perspective. So thinking of things of how close it is to transit, access to the property, access from the property, that doesn't necessarily always mean, though, that that's what everyone wants. So it's a consideration of all these different factors of open space, residential, or potential retail or commercial uses. So those are sort of the outlines of those two properties. The real key, though, is under these next 2 points on here. Every recommendation in there is intended to help maintain the character. We're not gonna, there's nothing in the plan that you're gonna see to put in a building as high as the Willis Tower. It wouldn't make sense in your community. But to really think, what are those values? What makes you want to live in Forest Park? And it's really maintaining that balance of different residential types, as well as attractive homes, townhomes, and apartments that people want to live in. We've also looked at specific areas, and I have two examples up here, the areas north of Madison and south of Randolph. That does not mean, again, that we didn't look at other areas. Those are just two areas that we chose to focus on in part of the recommendations. With commercial land uses, it's also similar. We're looking at the overall picture of the village. There are certain corridors that we tended to focus on more because they need some attention. They need some enhancements and some improvements. But the recommendations, again, are intended to retain existing businesses and attract new ones. And by doing so, we have some specific action items. One is to create an economic development opportunity plan. And the intent of putting a study in the report, you might be thinking, well, why in a study would you recommend a study? And it's because some of these things really take a significant amount of detail, a second look, a more particular look with a lot more detail, something that's a little bit beyond the scope of an overall plan. But again, thinking back to what Janet said, that gives you the framework and the opportunity to go ahead and do it because it's supported in this document. The other is a commercial district improvement plan. That again is looking more a little bit at the aesthetics. How does the commercial corridors look? Where do you need streetscape improvements? So we've outlined a couple of suggestions regarding that. Forest Park also has a number of TIF districts. And right now I can see I'm already overloading you a bit with information. We're almost there for a break. We're looking at ways that we can maintain those TIF districts, keep them viable. We're also putting in recommendations for the expansion of certain TIF districts, or ones that might not necessarily need to be renewed. Industrial areas in this community are very important, especially to the tax base. We have 3 industrial areas that we looked at specifically. Hannah, south of Roosevelt, those along Industrial Drive, and those north of Franklin towards like the Farmington Foods area. So those are sort of the 3 areas. Now industrial uses have a place in a community, but yet at the same time we also hear from a lot of residents, you don't want to be looking at a factory, right out of your living room window. So considerations for that were made in the various recommendations to make sure that there's visual boundaries. The aesthetics are maintained, but people can still have access to the industrial properties. They need to have loading docks. Can they get in and out of those loading docks? We've seen a lot of rehabilitation in the areas, and so we're accounting both for what's going on right now and again, the future of those industrial properties. Mixed uses. There's two ways of thinking about mixed use, and we've considered both in the recommendations. The first is sort of your traditional mixed use, which means commercial retail on the first level and then residential above. And the second way to look at it is literally a mixture. Residential here, commercial here, maybe light industrial, and literally having them in the same area. So both ways were considered, and the real key and a very significant part of this plan, based not only on the grant requirements, but also what makes sense for this community, is looking at transit-oriented development. We have wonderful access to the CTA, Metro if you choose to, even though it's slightly outside, and also access to expressways. And then of course bus stops. All of those things can be utilized to really create an economic environment as well as one that you want to live in around those transit stops. As you know, there is a lot of cemetery land in this community. We've all seen a lot of the jokes online about sometimes there's more dead people in Forest Park than alive.
Always.
Always.
Forest Park is
But that's also a really great resource to utilize. So we looked at those cemeteries not as a way to literally be dead, but how to make those vibrant, how to utilize historic resources. You have the casket races, folks coming out for tours, things like that, visiting the Haymarket or the circus graves and things like that, getting people to utilize those resources, almost sort of like an adage toward the Victorian era, the connection to the Des Plaines River, things of utilizing that as green space more so than cemeteries. We also have a lot of vacant land. We're all familiar with the economic downturn and the hits that it's taken on not just Forest Park, but communities throughout the region. So building on what the village has already done to address vacancy, continue that, and make sure that those properties are being utilized. And this last one is healthcare facilities. It's not a huge land use within Forest Park right now, but there are opportunities to have complementary uses. Draw on the Hines Veterans Facility, Rush University's hospital, or other facilities. There's physical therapy places. We do have an aging population, and it is a viable market and a way to look ahead to the future. All right, so now enough of me talking for a little bit here. Before I turn it over and see what questions or comments that you have, Janet went through the goals and objectives, and you guys have seen those multiple times. And the reason that we're bringing these up again is if you do have comments, questions, think what the purpose is. You know, why do we make these recommendations? What are we really thinking towards? So with that, I am going to be quiet for just a moment. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
You had mentioned the demographics and what the predictions were of the demographics. What are those?
You mean the numbers exactly?
Yeah,
Or do you
or
mean what the
how,
projection is?
what do you predict, how do you predict the community will look in the 10 years? I mean, what, according to the data that you gathered? So yes, the numbers.
I don't know the numbers off the
Okay,
very top of
what,
my head.
I mean, just a
But
rough
give me a
go.
So
second.
if you, I don't know if you have a copy in front of you, but most of the demographics are on page 16 as far as population by age. You'll see that the 2010 census, Forest Park had a total population of 14,167
Oh, wait, page
people.
16, right?
Correct.
I don't,
All the demographics.
they're not numbered, but give me a second. Hold on a second.
Yeah, all the demographics are in section 2, and where projection data was available, such as on the population, some of the age. We've also provided comparisons to surrounding communities. In general, there is growth. The population will increase, but the population growth rate is a little bit more than some of the surrounding areas in county, I believe, but you're not seeing an extensive amount of growth. Like the population is expected to increase, but it's not going to double. We also have it up on the screen if you don't want to look through. Were you just curious what the numbers were, or did you have other questions regarding the numbers?
I just didn't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you.
It's a lot to digest, so if you can't get through every table tonight, it makes sense. Does anyone else have any questions about the land use or?
Well, on the numbers, I went through all the numbers, they were really well done, especially how it compares to Park report. What were some things that stuck out to you? Like the rental to home ownership thing was incredibly glaring, you know, like getting people on board, and we've talked about that in past discussions. The amount of people in school between the ages of 5, or what is it, 5 and 19, as a percentage of the population based on our friends at Oak Park and River Forest.
Is that included in here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's, if there's anything you want to know, it's pretty much there.
I think the one thing that we did notice in going through that is how consistent it was with what everyone was actually telling us. We understood the diversity and the comparisons to other communities. We did expect a high rental rate. We knew that from day one coming to a public meeting, that rental rates were a concern of some folks, and also that it was a little bit higher. Having done a lot of the work in this area, and our sub-consultant on this project, Valerie, has worked a lot in Forest Park, so she was already very familiar with a lot of the conditions and what to expect as well. To do a lot of these projections and things like that, while it is about the numbers to some regard, there was also a lot of conversation with various stakeholders in the community who are leaders of different community groups. Valerie also spoke to a lot of realtors to understand what the buying and selling was like. So there was a lot that was consistent with the numbers, which is always good to have. Because if you start seeing people telling you one thing, but then your numbers say something totally else, then you have to really stop for a minute and be like, okay, wait, why are the perceptions so different? But in all honesty, a lot of the things that people have said to us sort of matched up with where the numbers were going.
I'm going to follow up with that. Is there anything that you would change now, or think a little differently on what's a little bit more important after seeing and confirming what people tell you, which is one thing, running the numbers about some of the demographics and things in this town, and what's important to people either who are vocal or maybe not represent them? Did you about face on any issues that you saw? Because I'm not going to share it all right now because I'm still kind of going through it, but I thought there were some things we should probably focus on a little bit more intently than when we started this a year or so ago. Do you agree with that?
I think the interesting thing, numbers-wise, and looking at it from that perspective, while it matched up quite a bit, what you'll see, and we have some comments in here, is when you look at race as the community as a whole, and then race in the schools themselves. In the schools themselves, in District 91, you see a lot higher of the minority population than you do as representative of the whole population. It's tough from the numbers to say why exactly that is. To do those connections between race and economics and all of that would go a little bit beyond what we did for this plan per se. But as sort of a just quick glance at that, that is one of the things that you could see that you have to think for a second. But even that, while the numbers kind of, oh wait a second, why is the number so high here in the minority population, but the communities doesn't have that high of a minority population? One of the things you think about, well, does that mean something? We need to take a second look. But those are the kinds of things that we also have in the recommendations. So it's following through on all of those different things to see then, why did we see something that kind of stood out a little? So not to completely jump ahead, but when we do get to some of the school stuff, we did look at participation in the schoolhouses. We did look at it, working with Joelle and Tim. We're also aware of some studies that were already still fits a little bit with what folks are telling us. And it also plays into perceptions of how communities are, how things function. Another one would be looking at languages. Languages aren't always brought up in comprehensive plans, but because it was a federal grant, we did look at limited English proficiency. And this community, again, is quite diverse, but you don't necessarily need a lot of the secondary language. You know, for instance, we don't have to put out tons of stuff. I'm from a community that has a significant Polish-speaking population as a first language. So all the materials I receive from the village I live in are both in English and English. I don't see that as a large indicator. So those are the things that that told us.
One of the other things that I noticed, we had included my location things. I was really surprised when I looked at the number of paid employees within Forest Park. I was just surprised to see that you've got almost 5,000 employees, people coming to Forest Park to work here. And I think that that's really important to know, that you're bringing in this many people, giving them jobs, and then hoping that they're going out to lunch, that they're saying, oh, it's more convenient for me to drop my dry cleaning while I'm at work, that they're really utilizing businesses within Forest Park to help, to help your businesses and to generate your tax revenue. So that was something that was surprising to me.
Alright, I'm gonna move on. You can always come back to things, as you're already seeing. A lot of these topics are interrelated, and sometimes it is hard to separate out one versus the other, because they do play into how the other plays out. We are gonna move into transportation, and on this section, folks from the Sam Schwartz engineering team went out and looked at all the various conditions that currently existed within Forest Park in order to come up with some of the recommendations. And again, here we do have a couple of ideas to have further investigations and additional study. And again, it's because we see certain things, but don't always have enough information to say, you need to exactly change this. So we do have conduct a traffic study. And in this particular one, we are looking at Roosevelt Road. It's something that will make sense as improvements are being done, especially with grants that have been received, to start working already on that area. We're also looking at continuing traffic calming initiatives. At a variety of the visioning workshops, we heard from a lot of folks, people speeding through neighborhoods. What kinds of things can we do? So we have recommendations in order to continue traffic calming initiatives. And it's everything from placing street furniture to looking at parking on the streets, and also crosswalks. If they're marked differently, does that hint to someone who's driving on, maybe I gotta slow down, I might see a pedestrian over here. The village is also working with IDOT, CTA, and other regional agencies to look at I-290 and as well as some of the CTA stations. And that's provided a great opportunity to continue those relationships, but also to look at specific things in the village, such as widening the displays on Circle Avenue bridges. Anyone who's been up those or down those gets that they really are tended to be more comfortable for someone driving. So we have recommendations in there to look at widening it in order to provide pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And of course, there's always parking. In any community, everyone always has parking as a concern. So the village has already conducted quite a few parking studies. So what we're really looking at here is increasing the parking supply. We looked at the permits and things of that nature, and looking at ways to enhance those facilities, including different types of payment systems. And that way it'll enable people to really ease in their experience, and thereby the link to all the other sections is sort of that spiral downwards of collecting folks coming here. Hey, it was really easy to park and I can go right in that store over there. So those are the types of things that we were looking at, as well as the things between them. As we've already pointed out a number of times, and you all know this from living here and probably seeing it every single day, you're a great transit system. There are some improvements that need to be done. We have heard from folks, you might be taking your life a little bit in your hand to walk across to get into this Plains station. But the resource is there. So our plan in some ways looks at ways to improve those, work with those agencies, improve the stations, get the access that you need so you can actually use them. And then also bring people to Forest Park. Again, we're so close to the city. It's a great place to commute to and from. And also, with that multiple options, people don't necessarily feel stuck. Like, I have to get on this train. They have multiple ways to get different places. And I don't want to forget bus stops. Sometimes we get so involved with talking about the CTA facilities and forget sometimes that CTA also has buses and PACE also has buses. So we are looking to work a little bit more with PACE on the shelter programs, enhancing some of those. We've seen some areas, especially along Harlem Avenue or Roosevelt Road, where we've seen families trying to sit along a bench and don't quite have the space or the room or feel comfortable enough if the traffic is right there. So looking at ways to improve those, make them a little bit more comfortable. Now, as much as we all like driving or taking the train, there are times where we will still want to walk, and we may even want to take our bikes. So Forest Park has started a system for bike routes. The Illinois Prairie Path is here. So what our team looked at is ways to improve that once again. The great thing about this community is so many things are already here. It's just taking it that one step further, which is exactly what a comprehensive plan is supposed to do. Take you that one step further, take a little bit more detail, and that's what we're looking at with creating an overall pedestrian and bicycle plan. So that doesn't mean you don't have those facilities, you do. It's just looking at those locations where there might need some info, where there might just be a slight gap in the sidewalk, or where we can make the bicycle facility just a little more comfortable. Maybe not so much for the rider that rides at 40 miles down the street flying by with their helmet hat on fire, but for folks like me who don't like taking one hand off the handlebar. And also, again, getting back to pedestrian improvements, looking at crosswalks in those high-traffic pedestrian areas, things near schools, near the library, coming to Village Hall, all of those different locations. So again, I am going to bring it over to our discussion. And our transportation section, again, has a lot going on. But the intent is you have the multimodal system. What can we do to improve it? And that's where our recommendations are based off of. Does anyone have any questions about transportation? Whether you've had a chance to look at it or not? Yeah.
You're still, Images still represents IDOT, right? So
we do
you're,
work up with IDOT on a number
yeah.
of projects.
Anything to deal with the Des Plaines Avenue or Harlem Avenue or Circle Avenue Bridge is going to be hung up with the state and the feds in terms of what's going to happen to the Eisenhower. I don't think we should spend a nickel on any of that until that's all sorted out, and that could be a decade away. So is it worth investing any time on that in this plan now, since it's going to be dictated at some point in the future by entities that we probably won't have control over?
I would say yes, actually. Again, when you think of the heart of a comprehensive plan is, it's setting out your path forward for a lot of things. So the one thing that you do need to maintain in all these projects, whether they get built or not, or what the time frame is, you want to set yourselves up for being able to work with those different agencies. And the big thing about these is a lot of those projects are in various stages of the planning. If you don't bring up the ideas, they will never get heard. And so while you might feel that there's not a lot you can do to change IDOT, it starts somewhere, and it starts with things like the plan. It starts with those policies. And the reality is you don't know how the future is going to look for an agency like IDOT, where the elections are going to take things. So having it in your plan, again, sets you up for being able to handle those improvements as well as to plan around them. So
Do you
for
expect,
instance,
I'm sorry, I thought you were pausing.
no, for an instance, if you look at the Circle Avenue Bridge, that's coming right over into where the Ruse property is being redeveloped. So one of the things that would be great is to have that pedestrian and bicycle access that's a little bit better along that bridge. So folks going back and forth from the neighborhoods to the north of that can get across and actually access those Park District facilities without as much difficulty. So again, the plan sets forth the framework to be able to do that.
My question was, do you, without sarcasm, do you honestly believe that when IDOT finishes its final plans, that they will be looking at our comprehensive plan documents? I honestly didn't get that impression with all the meetings that I went to.
They do, actually. IDOT does. And as a member of teams that works on various projects with the state, both as someone from this organization as well as in past lives, they do. We have to. It's understanding things from that overall perspective. The way it works is you can't plan in complete isolation. And one of the facets of this plan, you'll notice coordination with other agencies, and it's in a number of places. In fact, it's probably repeated a couple of times. And it's that importance of working with them to make different people aware of your plans and your goals. If you don't have it in a plan somewhere, it's very difficult for someone from one of those other organizations to say, well, wait, don't you remember someone over in that last meeting said they want this? But if you have your plan and you have it set out that this is the goal and how you want the community, the state and other regional agencies will look towards that. And when you look ahead to CMAP and other organizations like that, and like Go To 2040 plans and things like that, they do look at individual communities. They need all of that to work together, because if it doesn't work as a whole system, it's going to kind of fall apart from that angle.
So we're essentially getting our cards on the table then now.
Yes, and I think Tim wanted
Thank
to.
you.
All I wanted to add here is that over the last 2 years, we've been meeting every several months with IDOT on this, specifically the crossings, both Harlem, Circle, and Des Plaines. And we've recently met with IDOT and the park, so that we're all talking at the same time about the Roost property and how Circle Avenue might interact with the Roost property. And they've specifically said, in terms of long-term planning, it will help us get you what you want if it's written down somewhere. They've
Right.
said that to us at meetings. So, quite honestly, Stephen, I was kind of in your ballpark. Yeah, they don't really care, but I must say I'm very impressed with at least the interest that they've shown in what the community wants for all those overpasses. So, anecdotally, that's what I have for you.
Thank you.
And you're going to have to apologize. I can't see name tags.
So, being on the Parks and Rec Board for 6 years, there was always things that came up, and one of my biggest things was the dog park for many years. And all I kept hearing, the dog park was one, and then also another was, as you're coming up the 290 heading east into the city, up on the ramp onto Des Plaines, how awful it looks with the green, it's like a green mass of weeds. And all I heard month after month from our public works was, it's IDOT's property, we can't do anything with it. I heard the same with the dog park. It's IDOT, we don't know what's happening, we can't do anything with it. So we were always in this constant stasis. And it was really frustrating because I drive up that ramp a couple times a week. It's ugly. It's not a good entry into the city. And the other side is not very exciting either. So I kept hearing IDOT, IDOT, IDOT. There's nothing we can do. So what can we do?
Well, I can't speak for IDOT, obviously.
Yeah.
But again,
They couldn't even cut the grass because it was IDOT property.
I think one of the key things with working with any governmental agency, whether it's internal within Forest Park or outside of it, is getting things on the table and getting them in writing and continually getting them in writing and continually getting your voice out. So one of the important things that we've done with this plan is hear what you have to say and actually bring it in and internalize it and put it into the writing. And so the more that you do that, at some point, you're going to hit someone who's going to listen and make that change. Like I said, I can't speak for IDOT and tell them that, just because we put in the plan here, that needs to be done. But it's a good start. If we put that in the plan and you take it forward to IDOT or whoever it might be and say, look, this is really what the citizens, the business owners, all the folks in Forest Park really want. You got to start somewhere. And
So
that's really
who's
the
that-
heart of that.
Who's then taking that? Are we
I'm sorry.
Are you doing that, Tim? Are you putting this forward to them, or how is
Well,
that
abs-
happening?
I mean, absolutely, and again, when we were talking specifically about displays, that type of thing was mentioned, but when and if, and believe me, there's some if involved in the I-290 expansion, and it may not happen in my lifetime, but when it does happen, I can, as sure as I'm standing here, guarantee you that that bridge will be significantly wider. It won't be the same bridge anymore. There'll be significantly better access to CTA. There'll be significantly better access for both pedestrians and bicycles with dedicated lanes. I mean, it's absolutely going to happen same way at Circle. So we've been very involved. And just quickly to answer your other question, yeah, it is IDOT. And there are different levels. There's maintenance guys at IDOT who it's like pulling teeth. There's engineers at IDOT who really seem interested in bigger pictures and bigger plans. But believe me when I tell you, if we sent our guys down there to mow that, we would get jammed up for it. They're not insured down there. There's all kinds of problems. And we try to force them to, I mean, I drive by it every day too. And it's a mess and I hate it. But it's IDOT. This seems to be different in the longer term planning for whatever reason. I couldn't be more impressed with the interest that they're showing at this point.
In the transportation section, we were talking about bicycles and bike paths and things like that. Our town is very bad at that right now. North Riverside is excellent at it. They have some dedicated bike lanes. They have some dedicated paths with not outside of the area. And we have some of them for that. But in town, like even in the park, you can't ride a bike. You're on Harrison Street, and you take your life into your hands sometimes riding down that street. And is there, in the plan, like I said, I just got it, so I haven't read it, but how do you address that? What do you see? Do you see bike lanes where it's bicycles only, or are you still mixing bikes and traffic and parking and things like that? I was just curious I'll read about it, but.
There's different places where different recommendations are. To specifically look at every street and its width and what it can handle is part of what would be in an overall bicycle and pedestrian plan. Now that being said, we have looked at those connections between the Illinois Prairie Path as well as other places with the existing signages. They've also looked at locations on future development projects, things like Roosevelt Road, where bike lanes and things like that can fit in. So some of it's going to come down to sometime in the future. Again, we're looking ahead. We're also looking at some of the behaviors that are currently in town. Our team noticed a lot of folks riding their bikes on sidewalks because they caught on that there was a safety concern and people felt they were safer on the sidewalk, which can cause some other issues in terms of people walking. We've looked at locations where the sidewalk can be widened, whether or not that would be widened to accommodate a shared use path. That's the potential. There are some spots where we've suggested like a 10-foot wide. So you could potentially ride a bike up there if you marked it as a shared use path.
Have they looked at all at the bump outs that are being created can be treacherous because they bring bicycles from the side of the road into the middle of the road quite often? Have they looked at slowing that down at all, the development of the bump outs? Or there's an old abandoned train line now that goes from Circle to 22nd Street that could be a direct path to the Salt Creek path, because North Riverside again is very active too, and if you can get from 16th Street at Circle, you could be in a dedicated bike lane all the way to 26th and in a dedicated lane to the zoo path. Those are the kind of questions that I was wondering, have you guys been addressing at actual sites, or are you going to leave that for somebody else to do later?
It is a little of both. They did look at the potential for different things of that nature, and again, looking at those various connections. In general, we did not get into the very specifics of what you're mentioning, like on this street or this connection here and there. That is something that they would consider as part of the overall pedestrian and bicycle plan.
And the thing about the bump outs?
The bump outs,
What brought those about, and because those are bad on bicycles. I don't know if you ride a bike very often, or if you ride it in this town, it's not.
Yeah, sadly, you're asking the wrong person in terms of capabilities on riding a bicycle, but I do understand what you're talking about with the bump outs. As part of the recommendations, I believe it was at one of the visioning workshops, there was actually a mixed review on what those bump outs do. Because the bump outs can serve as a traffic calming, but at the same time, folks who do ride bikes, like you're suggesting, really don't like them, because you do kind of have to weave in and out.
You're into traffic then.
We did not recommend any more bump outs. We looked at traffic calming as an overall. But in terms of, again, the bike, and I'm not trying to avoid your question, we really looked at a higher level rather than those specific connections. Looking a little bit more at signage and the identification of them rather than specific locations. Yes.
My question is more in the design of these transportation systems. So, for example, if you're anywhere in Forest Park and you're not from Forest Park, I think there's a challenge of finding out where actually you are. So, in an earlier meeting in a workshop, you did some really good images of how you change bus stops to make them look like places safe and stuff. So, is there a plan for, say, for example, I use the CTA quite a bit. I haven't driven a car in a number of years. Take public transportation, I find all the devices and apps on the phone, get the trip advice. Would there be a formal plan, so if you're walking down Madison Street, Roosevelt Road, go someplace that physically has orientation, where you can get to the blue line, or the green line, or the bus?
Again, you're pointing out one of those exact places where, again, there's a cross in the different types of areas in the plan. So we do talk about in other portions of the plan, gateway identification as well as community identification and signage. So creating those links both from a visual perspective, but also the physical connections of a similar sign everywhere that'll progress you through the village. So we do talk about those aspects. In terms of bus shelters in particular, we have recommendations to continue working with PACE. PACE does have, let me ask again, is it a custom, like a unique, I'm floundering for the word here, to have more custom shelters, so they're not just like the cookie cutter that they utilize. Now that does require some assistance from the community to do those more unique type shelters, but otherwise PACE does have their standard shelters. At times it could be a cost share, it could be some input, there's different things that go into that, but that is a recommendation within here, just to look at that. And when you do have similar bus shelters and the signage everywhere, it does create a link both visually as well as in some ways physically, because you know this one's good here, this is good here, they're all kind of linked together.
And just to add, we do recommend that the village work with PACE to get a consistent shelter design, throughout the village, so that, it's just for helps with route identification, shows that the route is a permanent route, a fixture, and encourages, it's there to encourage ridership. As far as signage, you can work with PACE, as far as, they really have a traditional sign, for the routes. When they get into their other programs, like their arterial rapid transit system, they're going to have different branding, different shelters, larger signs, so that people can really identify that kind of service. And that's something that you would, the PACE will come out to your community, when they're developing their arterial rapid transit program, and if any of the routes within Forest Park are eligible for that program.
I think we have 3 questions. Is that fine? You have a minute?
Yeah. I was just curious, in the study, did you take into account the impact that the Metro line has on the community as well, even though it doesn't stop specifically at Forest Park? Did you take into account how that impacted the community and what that meant to the community, or was that just considered not part of it?
We looked at ridership numbers on a very high level.
Just on a light side, in the answer to the signage question, the confusing part for people, when you get off the L stop at Harlem Avenue in Forest Park, it says "Welcome to Oak Park." And that sort of was always irritating to me for the 30 years I took that L, because they have a map there with all the Oak Park shops and stores, and it's all itemized on there. And I'm like, why does Oak Park get away with this?
So in the middle of the street, we'll put one on one side, so it goes.
It just, it's Forest Park stop.
I think I saw another.
In regards to like PACE and CTA and concerning like the bus routes and stuff, I know that we have a lot of bus routes in town. But as far as, I didn't see anything in there about like trying to promote like, more, like it's like every 30 minutes or an hour between each bus, more frequent service or more consistent, like it's kind of like a spaghetti mess of different routes. Yeah, you can get to where you need to go, but you may have to switch 2 or 3 times just to go, up and down Harlem Avenue, for example.
So you're pointing out something that's really good information and something that's considered in the recommendations. Unfortunately, Forest Park can't control
Understood.
the pace routes. So we don't have specific recommendations per se to change the service. What we can do again, and this is where those interagency talks really come into play. Like if you have it in your plan that bus stops, things like that need to be improved, that's one of your starting points. Looking at the lightings, how many people are getting on, how many people are getting off.
And it is a recommendation that we have in the plan to work along with PACE. PACE has liaisons that have different target, different districts. So the village needs to, and maybe they do, work already with the PACE representatives.
But even like between like PACE and CTA, I mean, on Harlem Avenue, PACE goes north to the Green Line, ends its route, and then CTA picks up. I mean, within like the same type of thing. So I was just wondering whether or not some sort of, Forest Park recommendation to when coordinating with these other agencies could be put in the plan.
One of the things, and it's great actually that you're pointing this out, is we can brag a little bit for your community. Forest Park has been getting quite a few grants lately, and one of those grants is on Harlem Avenue, and to look at transit-oriented development, and it's coming from the Regional Transportation Authority. So RTA is really involved in that, and with that transit-oriented development, you are looking at different things like that because that becomes important. How many people are getting on and off at different times? Well, if someone's getting off every 10 minutes, well, what kinds of shops do you need? What kinds of residential development? So that is one of the studies that the village has already gotten some funding for and we'll be looking in. So we do have that in the plan to acknowledge that, to, again, set the framework and the baseline for the village to proceed forward with that, as well as some specific recommendations for Harlem Avenue, locations of where to maintain the residential, again, looking at some of those streetscape elements, looking at where the sidewalks need to be wider. Some places the sidewalk's very narrow with a pretty high traffic area. So exactly those things are what part of the grant is for, but also in the plan to sort of in an indirect sort of way. Yes?
And one thing, this might be another purview, but, and I actually did look through this plan this afternoon, by the way, so I'm not going to agree, I was just curious what they say. Did you, as far, and I noticed that there's supposed to be an increase in elderly population and that sort of thing, I did look at the population numbers and so forth. Is there, is that addressed specifically in here? Because with an aging population and also with a disabled and handicapped population, which is not necessarily age-related, are there, and I'll give a for instance, I've had foot surgery last year twice, and I needed handicap access for quite a while. Now I'm pretty healthy, now. But it really struck me how important it is to have close, immediate access for people who find it, like how important. And were some of those things taken into consideration? So I remember going to the library one day, and there was like one handicapped spot next to the library, and it's also very difficult to get into the library, even if you're in the handicapped spot. You have to go a long
where the sidewalk is too narrow. You couldn't have a wheelchair comfortably go on the sidewalk and also allow for passing. Typically, you need 4 to 5 feet, I believe. Jan, 4 to 5 feet for a wheelchair on a sidewalk. Pretty sure it's 4 to 5 feet. So in some locations, you might just even need to increase the width to allow that to occur. Other streetscape components, again, looking more at the general picture of what's going on. You don't want to put like there's a lot of decorative bollards and things like that. You don't want to plop down in the middle of the sidewalk, even if the sidewalk's wide enough. That makes it hard to traverse around. We do have considerations for ADA accessibility going back to things like the bus shelters. Is there a place where a wheelchair can pull up? There also is some great stuff the village is already doing. There's quite a few benches and things like that throughout the town that provides opportunities for people to sit for a little bit on their way to stuff. Traffic calming initiatives, things like that, all account for that type of population, as well as some of the recommendations within the residential section. So one of the things that you'll see in one of the recommendations for the Altenheim, not saying that the village has to select this, but one of the options based on the market analysis is to have age-specific housing for those who are, is it 55 plus, the senior population of moderately priced, because right now it's essentially the Altenheim. That's what's the moderately priced housing available for that. So there's different accommodations throughout the plan. There's no one particular place, but there is small things here and there that address it.
Thank you.
Yes. Hi. On an overarching view or any specifics you have, what types of environmentally friendly, ecologically friendly, sustainable, whatever type of term you want to label it with, what type of goals do you have for Forest Park?
Can I hang on to your question?
Yes, you can.
Okay, because we're about to get there.
Sure.
It'll be in 2 sections.
Okay.
That is obviously something that's really important. So remind me when we get there. Is there any other questions about transportation? Okay, I'm going to move along then. One of the other things that we do in the plan is look at both short-term and long-term. And you're probably already starting to get a sense of this, is that things can happen immediately, and some things might take a little bit longer to occur. There's, again, some great municipal facilities already here. The library is outstanding. We have a very convenient village hall. At some point in the future, it would be wonderful to have a municipal campus environment where things are really linked together, maybe in the same physical setting. So that's a longer term goal. In the meantime, we can utilize different other methods and ways to connect it visually, the signage, the gateway identification. And it is very important. The first thing that struck me when I started working on this project was how proud everyone is to live in Forest Park. It's pretty amazing to sit here and hear everyone say, I've been here since 1985. I've been here for 14 years. I have 2 kids who go to the schools here. That's a really great thing to hear because that pride sort of emanates throughout all these recommendations and through the things that we're looking for to build on what's already here for the future. So again, we do have those ideas of promoting agency coordination, working with each other, getting those conversations started. Something that was done for this plan, but as well as other plans and policies that the village is going to work on. Utilities and municipal infrastructure. Obviously, we need those basic things to keep the village running. You gotta have your water, you gotta have electricity, things like that. So what we have recommendations for is to ensure that we continue to find financing to have the capital improvement program. We also want to make sure that we continually revisit the electric and water rates. As time goes on, you could already see changes in how those services are being offered. For a long time, your electricity came, that was it, you didn't have a choice. Now there's electricity aggregation suppliers, so you have options. So making sure that we're continually monitoring those to get the best rates and the best deals for folks that live here and work here. We're also looking at different standards. Again, we have the waste enclosures listed out here. We've noticed in driving around town and walking through the town, there's various places where there's containers kind of laying out. So again, we're getting back to that idea of making the place visually attractive as well as purposeful and have different standards to address those types of things. And the first one up here is extremely important, stormwater management. Anyone who has lived here in the past couple of years they seen an increase in urban flooding. It's sort of the obvious thing that has hit not just Forest Park but other communities. So how do we address that? We do have a few recommendations in here. Some the village is already working on. They've already started an existing conditions analysis of the stormwater system, looking at places where it's combined, where it's not, what can be done for that. Again, looking at waterways. Things like this are a significant investment money-wise. So looking ahead to the future and how to think about it is really what the intent of the recommendations in this section are. Building on that, there's also the basic needs. Who's looking out for everyone here? The police and the fire and the emergency services. So we've spoken to a lot of folks and realized that the police department facilities have already expanded, and there's some high quality and high tech labs and things like that are going on in Forest Park that other communities don't even have. So continue improving that, maintaining, I should say, that police force and the fire department, making sure that they're getting the services that they need. Again, they've already gotten quite a few grants to increase that, so continue to be on that course. Make sure that everything is as high tech and right there for everyone who lives and works here. You hinted a couple of times at the schools. And again, the purview of the comprehensive plan is a little light on what it can actually do to change the schools. But again, it's setting that pace forward for what you can do. And that's working with school officials, continually lobbying legislators to allow for the creation of maybe a school district sometime in the future. The village has already done a study that actually happened just after the last comprehensive plan. We're looking at the results of that, pulling out different things that are feasible to do right now. And of course, that always requires community participation. So even if your kids aren't in school, getting out there, participating in school board meetings, looking at the overall health of the community. With the library as well, every time I was there, the place was packed. And that's a great thing. So to continue to make sure that the village is able to assist the library in meeting both short and long-term needs. Looking at the number of seats it has, looking at the technology, finding ways to help it continue to provide necessary services for the community. It's not just a place where you go check out a book anymore, but now it's also a place where people can go. I've seen a lot of the kids hanging out there after school. There's a lot of programming. So the village is looking in the plan to find ways to continually support that. Before I move into the last section, does anyone have any comments about community facilities or some of the emergency services?
Are you doing anything with the Park District building?
With the Park District building, because again, the Park District is a little bit separate from the village and their organization, we have most of our recommendations are intended to assist the Park District in ways that they can and provide the necessary support. But the village, again, doesn't necessarily regulate how they utilize the buildings. So it's more assisting with things like access management, what we were talking about, Circle Avenue Bridge and the Roos property, helping them with the administration of grants if needed, looking at sometimes in some locations with the environmental remediation that's needed in some of those areas, it doesn't just stop because the boundaries are right there. So the village is more in a supporting role and continuing the cooperation with the village to make sure that the services the Park District provides fit what the village needs, both from a demographic perspective as well as what the future population looks like. I don't know if that completely helps, but we can't, in the plan, you can't really.
Yeah, I've never quite understood why the library's packed and the Park District building is always empty. There's not any space for kids there, and I guess I just don't understand the political reasons why it's so separate all the time. And why, because my taxes have a line item that say Park District.
Okay.
So I'm just not sure why it's not utilized more.
And like I said, we do have recommendations to become more involved, and the overall idea of citizen participation in various programs. And the reality of a Park District, if people don't utilize it, it's going to be tougher to continue to support those programs. But from the
district doesn't have anything to do with those parks.
Right, but I'm saying work in conjunction to make sure that if you put one here, it doesn't interfere with what the park district did over here. You don't want those resources in competition.
So in your plan, it does include the park district in the plan?
We do have it included, but in regard to more of the coordination and the cooperation and support of the park district programs. We don't have anything in the plan that directly regulates or provides a specific plan for the park districts. Any other questions? Moving into the environment and open green space, now we're kind of getting at a little of what we were just talking about. At the very beginning of this, we noted the importance of cemeteries, the importance of history to the community. There's a lot of events that have occurred over time in Forest Park that are significant both locally as well as regionally. So one of the things that is in Forest Park is a historic preservation commission. And we're not entirely certain that everyone knows about that commission. So one of the things that we have in here is to really publicize the duties of it. History is something that's sort of really a buzzword, so to speak. It's something that's growing in importance. As we move ahead into the future, it's always good to remember where you came from. And Forest Park, because of its place in the Chicagoland area and its history, there's a lot of connections that people have. Whether they're personal, I went through there. I remember going to the Frere Pan and Candy Factory, or all of those different things. Really utilizing this commission to bring those things forward. Conduct an overall historic survey. Identify what resources you have in the community. A lot of houses in the area have significant architectural styles. Possibly, we need to know that. So that's one of our recommendations. We've also looked at the tree replacement and maintenance program. This was something the village is already doing, but we also have recommendations not only to continue the program, but to find new ways to help fund it to make it more accessible to everyone. Maybe not have the wait list be so long, or to encourage additional replacements each year. That also being said, there's urban forestry programs where funding would then be available between regional, state, and national agencies to encourage having additional trees in the community. And trees provide a lot of advantages, everything from environmental to just the overall enjoyment and shade. And then it's this last one, and this is where I was talking a little bit about that coordination. So the village itself also wants to promote green space. But they don't want to do it to harm the Forest Park District. They're going to do it in conjunction with them. They're going to work with them so that the programs aren't butting against each other, but instead are working in conjunction to increase the overall green space for the community. So things like the tot lots, there is a new one that's been recently added. And also, just in general, increasing the overall green space, which is something that we've heard throughout public involvement at our workshops, our meetings, as well as in the interviews. In terms of standards, Forest Park is a little bit behind on the green space, so it is something that they definitely recognize and need to increase. So any opportunity, whether it's vacant space, potentially using part of the Altenheim for green space, all of those are different options that we looked at in the plan. And this next slide will probably actually answer a little bit of the question that we just talked about. So while we don't have specific recommendations to regulate any park district facilities, it is very important to maintain those cooperative agreements. Okay? And this gets back to the idea that we've been talking about throughout tonight about working with different agencies. You want to make sure everyone's got this open process so you know what to expect and how to work with it in the future. And that's what we've done in the plan here is set a pace for that. That's what the village wants. That's what you as residents, business owners, that's what everyone wants, is to work together, not, again, go against one another. There's also the Cook County Forest Preserve, the Miller Meadow. We've heard from a number of people ranging from the students all the way on through to residents who have been here for years and years, that sometimes the Forest Preserve facilities get a little scary and people don't necessarily go to them. So working with the Forest Preserve to make sure that they're clean, they're accessible, people can go there. Work with them so there's programs for recreational improvements, maybe a canoe launch, access to the Des Plaines River. So all of those are ideas. And preserving the environment and natural resources. So now I want to get back to the question that we had earlier. So a couple of the recommendations that we have in here are to, one, make sure we're always up on new regulations. So the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District has new regulations, for instance, about impervious surfaces. So make sure we're up on that. Do we know that that's happening? Continue our participation with that organization. Make sure that new developments are accounting for new technology, new theories and ideas. A grant that Forest Park also just received with the permeable alleys and removing some of the downspouts. All of those things can be incorporated into a green infrastructure plan. It also sets the pace forward for accounting for things that are going to come up in the coming years. It's very hard in the field of sustainability and environmental to predict 10 years from now because that technology is changing and changing so quickly. 15 years ago, no one was talking about porous pavements. Porous pavements now are in a lot of different locations. So what we've done in the plan is, again, set the baseline to allow the village to take on those new improvements. If we didn't put it in, it's a lot harder to plan for those and to account for those new items coming in. The other green things that we've done is continuing the refuse and the recycling programs, recreational tree replacement, working with the urban forestry program. All of those things contribute to how well the overall environment is, pulling out some of the air pollutants. Then we're also getting back into the agency coordination, working with IDOT, looking at the different ways that traffic moves, the different traffic patterns. For instance, if you build a roadway and all the cars sit there, that's going to cause some problems in terms of the air emissions. But working with those agencies, encourage the traffic flow to move through the village, but also at the same time, still allow for people to stop and go to different destinations, because that's what we want as well. We want people to come to the stores, come and visit the things that Forest Park has to offer. So with all that being said, is there any other questions regarding the parks and environmental? Yes.
Do you, the smart roads, have you included that in your plan, the smart roads and solar powered lights and things like that? Have you done all that, wind power, any of that?
We didn't.
You
We
didn't?
I've worked a lot in a different lifetime in terms of looking at those things. What makes some of that tough in this particular location is the density of the current development. It's not to say that it's not feasible. Those are the types of things that could be in that green infrastructure plan, but we didn't specifically call those out, again, because of the technology changes and the different things that happen so quickly with those. So it's something that could be considered when that plan is put together, but we didn't specifically call those out. And again, it's partially that technology changes much too quickly to commit to one particular thing in that regard.
But you did do the permeable surface roads?
We did permeable. Those have been around for a lot longer and have proven that they do work. There is still some studies out there on the overall lifetime of them and the life cycle of it. But as a whole, those are fairly well proven. Everything from the city of Chicago with the Green Alley program, that's about 15 years ago already, and it's still proving to be a success. There are different things that we did consider in terms of looking at those types of technologies. Things like snow plowing, where things can be placed. We're also aware that the village has already done some of the LED lighting. So there's different things that we've looked at both as part of the existing conditions as well as the future. But we would really put a lot of that into a green infrastructure plan. Partially based on financing, partially based on the changes in technology.
So is that something that you're planning on doing, or you haven't done it yet?
No, it's part.
You haven't done it yet, but
we
you're
have not
planning
done
on doing
yet.
it.
We have the plan in here to do
I gotcha.
as one of our priorities. Yes.
There seems to be a positive movement in community gardening. So I guess my question would be, do you fine tune that to be a zoning issue So for example, if I want to put a hot house on my property or on my livestock, but I mean, certain things that haven't been addressed that people are moving towards that direction now. Is that something that falls under your environmental overall thing?
We do have some information on the community gardening. In terms of looking at personal fixtures, if I'm understanding correct, we did not look at the individual housing.
And they would be considered under the zoning ordinance. You know, what kind of accessory structures are allowed, you know, on your parcel, what are the setbacks, you know, and other requirements. We didn't look specifically at the zoning ordinance for that item, but we certainly can take a look and see how the ordinance addresses that type of structure and that type of garden.
If Blue Island has a nice model.
Okay.
Blue Island's been doing it for a while.
Yes. Actually, I'm not familiar with Miller's Meadow.
With Miller Meadow?
Miller's Meadow, you were talking about that as possible, like, canoe launch? Isn't that's not Maywood?
It is part of Maywood. With the close proximity, we did consider it as a resource that folks from Forest Park do go to. Again, at a number of our visioning workshops, we did have people tell us that they do go there at times. Again, some of the critiques of it was that it wasn't often that clean, and it wasn't super inviting. It does have restrictions on timing, so some of the students that we spoke to said it's a difficult place for them to go after school, especially as the days get a little bit shorter. So it's not technically in Forest Park, but again, due to that proximity, we did consider it as a potential resource.
Were there any other locations that you guys were looking at that was possible for us to actually have access to the river that was really in Forest Park?
We did look at working with cemeteries for potential access. So that's an idea that we had mentioned a little bit earlier on. Years and years ago, cemeteries were used more as parks. So that is an option. It would just require a coordination with the individual owners of those cemeteries in order to allow public access across their property.
We wouldn't be able to use property that's like right where the prairie path is. Yeah, that's, it's kind of behind Altenheim, but it's part of the Metro parking lot, but it's right where the prairie path starts. Which I would think most
Right,
of
where the bridge goes to Maybrook.
Yeah. I mean, that's still
Think of that
Forest
area
Park.
specifically, yeah.
Is that a consideration at all?
We did not include that. I'd have to look at a map again, but that could be a possibility and something that we could note and look into.
The fellow that used to own Forest Home Cemetery, Haas, he used to have a launching site on Display River there. So
Okay.
Why did
Big
that stop?
cemetery, well, no, at where Forest Home is today.
Okay.
I think, I don't know exactly where. The
Okay, so
circle's
to make sure we have it by the Illinois Prairie Path.
Yeah, 100 years ago, hasn't changed.
And that's on.
By the bridge to Maybrook.
Okay. All right, we will look into that spot because we did not consider that one. Yes.
Do you have renderings?
Concordia.
Renderings of.
Like potential, like ideas that you have?
No, we don't.
Will you?
Probably not.
So it's just this.
Any other questions? Okay, before we move to the next section of the plans, just going back a little bit okay on time. Does anyone have any other questions?
I'm just wondering if you could go over what you said about Altenheim, because I did read what the plan has on page 87 and page 88, and it looks like there's some kind of market. You feel that there's a market push for either townhouses or one-story sort of ranch houses, or a low-income independent living facility with 50 to 75 units.
So to give you a bit of the process of where those recommendations came from, Valerie Kretschmer and Associates, who, like I said, has done quite a bit of work in and around this area, did a overall market analysis to look at what would be appropriate at both the Altenheim and the Des Plaines. So she looked at various factors in that consideration, everything from access to the existing market. She spoke to quite a few realtors in the area to gain a sense of what they were talking about. She also pulled some data about the current retail market, current information about offices, and so the recommendations that you're pointing out on page 87, the open space came more from public input, not necessarily from the market analysis, but the mix of the residential and open space and the residential came more from the market analysis. So there was consideration both of the public input as well as what the numbers, so to speak, said.
Are you making a recommendation as consultants to, are you making a recommendation? Because it seems like those two things, the public input was 7-1 against using for green space and the, are you making a recommendation to go with the market analysis, or are you not making a recommendation, just pointing out what the different options are?
So we left it as those are three options. The intent of this comprehensive plan is not to say this is exactly what the Altenheim should be. What it did instead is once again provide that baseline for folks to go back to and say that these are the things that make sense, and this is what the village should look at in the future. So those are three options that the village has to consider. All three can work. Each has different advantages and each has different disadvantages. By putting it in the plan though, it allows the village to go ahead and do something with the property.
All these ideas you have been with citizen input. So it's not only things that are feasible and logical, but it's also what the people of this town would like to have. Yeah.
And so with regard to the Altenheim, we've had a lot of folks say, just open space. We had a lot of folks say, I want open space, but I also recognize we have a lien on the property, we gotta make some money. So there's a lot of different opinions that have been considered, and then of course the market analysis, which is a necessary step in actually seeing what makes sense. But again, as you pointed out, and as Tim even mentioned at the beginning, if it's not in here, it's a lot harder to act on it later on in the future. So this gives you a base to go back to. So when new development proposals or new ideas come into play, you can go to this and say, all right, this is what we thought about, and this is what we as a community felt made sense for us looking ahead to the future. So that's why the three different options.
I'm sorry, you may have said somewhere before about the Altenheim, but the town doesn't actually own the structure, or do they?
There is, if I'm remembering the covenant correctly, if you would be able to help me out, for Joelle and Tim, it's building C that is part of the covenant, is that right? And then the other two buildings are still part of the Altenheim?
The vacant buildings are the ones that we own.
Okay.
So you don't own the full property, like from Madison all the way back to Metro?
That's
Or
correct.
you do?
No, we do not own the whole property.
Not even the land. So the land that was being used, like from Madison to the buildings themselves, that's owned by Altenheim.
It really does get quite confusing, but we actually have folks in Oakland here. But basically, the village does own from Madison Street
Yeah.
to the buildings, except for the two existing buildings that are occupied.
Okay.
Altenheim owns those. The village owns, I think there's two of them that are unoccupied and very dilapidated, and then all of the green space behind there. About in the back, 8+ acres in the back, and then several more up front. Altenheim just owns the existing buildings that are occupied today.
Is it that they own, or that it's like a a lease.
They own the property, they own the buildings, they're completely sovereign.
And there's a cemetery there.
We do have a section in the existing conditions, I'm just not finding the page right now, but we do explain a little bit more about that, about what's part of the village and what's still maintained by the Alderman in the back.
So just a couple of, just observations. So there are still properties available in the Grove. I mean, the Grove is not like so filled that where people live, the residents of the Grove. There are vacancies there, and there are people trying to sell their property, and they're having difficulty doing that. And then just anecdotally, in town, there's a lot of property available where people are trying to sell their property, and they're not able to do it. So it seems very, like, just as an observer, it seems unusual that then there's this huge need for people that want to jump into Forest Park to buy property, unless it's a new construction, maybe, I mean, perhaps, but that the Grove all of a sudden offers this great solution that people are clamoring for around, that I'm not aware of.
So what you're saying was taken into account in the market analysis and for that recommendation. So vacancy rates, things like that, we're accounting for and looking at that. And one of the things that they look at as well is different price points, different housing styles. So the recommendations for the Altenheim are more of the zero lot line and the attached townhouses, possibly with like a small little private area. So it's the different types of housing. So it's looking at it as a bigger picture and gathering a sense of the overall balance. And so what a lot of public input did tell us is that people do want single-family homes. So it's a little bit of combining both of those things and looking at that as a whole. The other thing too is thinking ahead to not just the short term, but also in the long term. So in that particular aspect, we haven't quite gotten there yet as well. As it seems to be because of those interrelations between things. We do set out a priority of when we think these things can occur. And the Aldenheim is one of those ones that we have a little bit further back in the time frame. And for exactly like some of the things you're saying, is predictions might change, projections might change. So we account for
Sustainability,
it the
I mean,
best we can.
sometimes things sound really great, but then 20 years down the line, we have, it's vacant.
Right, and you're still hitting at exactly what we're just about to talk to. So if you hold on to that as well, we'll talk a little bit about how the implementation of the plan works and how we think of exactly what you're saying. Like what happens if ideas change? What happens if we say right now and then 10 years from now we're going, oh wait, we've had someone say that.
In regards to the Altenheim, let's use the template when I brought up earlier about the comprehensive plan providing some sort of framework, putting our cards on the table for IDOT. Okay, as far as the Altenheim goes, are you using the same logic that you want to put the cards on the table so that it could be developed for housing? Because that's not what the people want. There's been no public outcry about the $275,000 lien. In the terms of our budget, it's not a tremendous amount of money each year. And developing it is no free lunch. You're going to add more people to the property tax rolls, but we're going to need more policing. We have to put in a water system, a sewer system, other forms of infrastructure. I think $275,000 a year is pretty dirt cheap compared to the alternatives down the road. People have spoken, as the woman behind me said, and the ratio is quite large, that people want green space. And I'm afraid by including these alternatives with partial residential or all residential is a dangerous thing. It's going to threaten us in the future that some council down the road may say, well, we want more tax money to play with. And I find it frightening, and personally I'd like to see those taken out of any projections for the Altenheim. Again, there's no public outcry saying we're paying $275,000 for this thing. I think the only outcry is that people can't really utilize it. And they'd like to, and there's ways to do it without making many improvements.
So, to answer a couple of the things that you said, as you've seen, the public involvement was pretty extensive, and we covered a lot of different methods and means for people to respond to us. There were quite a few that said open space. There were also quite a few that said, no, we need to make money off of this. So we do have to provide that balance. The great thing about a comprehensive plan is it's not a vote. It doesn't say, well, if 95% of the people say this is what we need to do it. And I can't stress this enough, and I know I've said it on a little bit of repetition, and you could almost hit the replay button on what I'm about to say, is we're really setting that case for what could happen. You have to look at the market analysis as well. It provides a little bit more on things such as access. How are people going to get there? There's also the covenant and what things are allowed in that area. There are 8 acres that are consistent with the R1 and R2 zoning. The uses need to be consistent with that. We got public comments suggesting anything from music venues to concerts in the parks. They're great ideas, and we took all those into consideration. But you also have to abide by that covenant. So there's different things at play, which is why we've left it open. So I get what you're saying in terms of it being dangerous and that it could steer a different way. But you're also hinting at what can change in terms of people's opinion later on in the future. People might say, look, we have the green space over here and other things that are going on in the community. If there's improvements in other locations, Miller Meadow gets a little bit easier to access. Drew's property is built. Different areas of green space come to light. It's again really looking towards what decisions can we make in the future and what data can we base it on. The market analysis is going to have to be redone. That's the reality of it as well. So what the plan does is allow for someone in the future to come along, bring to Joelle and or Tim, I got this great proposal. Can you guys take a look at it? What they're going to do, or other village staff, whoever it may be, is going to open up the plan and say, well, what can we do with this area? Is it consistent with that future vision? So again, that might change, but that market analysis, 5 years from now, I bet you anything it's different. But we have to leave it open to account for all of those different things. So I fully get what you're saying, and we truly, truly value all the public opinion. And that's what's really helped us even craft probably 95, 99% of the recommendations is that public input and that coordination with all members of the community, whether it be residents or business owners. But we have to leave it open for those changes. And truth be told, when that development proposal comes in, there is probably going to have to be some other type of backing to show why that makes sense. And that's one of the great things about planning, but also the toughest part of it, is that you have to think, all right, here's what's going on right now, but then you have to think 10, 15, 20 years down into the future. And it's tough. You're playing with some numbers, projections, things like that that you can gather and work from a solid data perspective. But it's kind of a guess. So you really need to make sure that the plan is open enough to allow for those changes. And that's exactly what we hope we did with that recommendation and some of the others.
Where did you get your data from on the Altenheim
So again,
development?
some of the data came from interviews with realtors. We couldn't hit every single realtor in town. Some of the data came from Esri, like I had talked about, in terms of the demographics, looking at population projections, market projections. Some of that data was aggregate from Dun & Bradstreet. Also looking at current market conditions, looking at the surplus and leakage. A lot of this is in the plan, but I'll be honest, it's very hard for me to remember all the statistics and stuff off the top of my head. But there is quite a bit in there about that. We also looked at office space. Do people really use office space here? What types of office space is being utilized? Access patterns. Where do people come in and out of properties? We collected data on the number of lightings through pace routes. We looked at train data.
No, I mean specifically development.
Specifically for the Altenheim. We considered the Altenheim in relation to the rest of the village.
Just real quickly, all of the data that, when I read it the other day on all time, frightened me as well. But after I sat with the folks for just a little bit and talked about it, like we just did now, it's more of what really can't go there as well. No large multifamily. And they did sort of impress upon me that it would be a disservice to not include it at all. I think, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but somewhere in there it says very specifically, this is the market analysis. But it's not what the people want. What the people want is clearly different. I don't know what that verbiage is exactly, but then it became very clear to me that the respondents much more favored something open. There can be debate for years about that. The other thing I did want to address was that I heard, Joe, what you said about the Grove, and I agree, but I'll tell you anecdotally that I know that 5 or 6 units that are brought under contract in the last 6 weeks, all of a sudden it started selling in the Franklin Forest Park. So I get that. And again, when they spoke to me about this market analysis, that was really talking to people who weren't from town. I was talking to experts who really just look at the data. Say, if you had to build something here, this would work. I wasn't talking to all of you folks. Again, I think the language strengthens that position considerably when you actually read it. It frightened me as well, but I felt better after talking about it.
We've had town hall meetings, we set up renderings for RIPFest. I mean, we've had lots of input, and overwhelmingly it has been for green space, not for development. So I really hope that that's our focus and that's their focus.
Yeah, I would say that it's certainly high on the list. I can't say that it's the focus or a focus because I'm not an elected official anymore. And again, keep in mind that the last plan we did was 2002. It's 2014, so it's 12 years old. This could be 12 years down the road. Frankly, nothing's going to happen at all tomorrow or the next day. But I think, again, after it was explained to me a little bit more fully, and I understood that this was a group of professionals analyzing data, I felt a little bit better about it.
If I'm hearing correctly, I think what you're saying is that you're presenting us information. What we do with that information is our decision. You're not making decisions for us. You're just giving us information.
We're giving you the options to go ahead.
Exactly that point. If the plan said it absolutely has to be green space, guess who just made the decision for the whole town?
Exactly.
And that's not necessarily the way it should go. I certainly agree that the majority of the people should have their opinion heard and should even be followed to a certain extent. But that's not what this is. That's not what the plan is
Right.
about.
And it is the elected officials who
Correct.
we have much more control over, so to speak, who are going to be making that decision.
We can take one more. I do want to be conscious of the time.
I just want to say that this is not a static
Correct.
environment that we're in. We can't just lay down the plans for, like Tim said, the next 12 years. The Aldenheim could decide to sell their buildings, and we could change the whole plan. We have to look for IDOT, and the things that we want in life, just like our children, might not be always the best things that we need to do. But this is just taking everything into consideration and putting on the table in a concise form that we looked up to see what public input was, to see what markets were saying at the time, to see what, right, this is my idea, is that?
Exactly. And actually, Dan is going to explain a little bit about exactly what we're all talking about and how this all wraps up.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about implementation and funding. Now that we have all these recommendations, how do we actually implement the recommendations and how do we fund these improvements? We've developed an action agenda. It's in your document. It's Addendum D. And it's a list of the recommendations. And the recommendations have been categorized according to the goals and objectives that they're designed to achieve. And they've also been prioritized There are 3 priority levels, priority 1, 2, and 3. And the priorities aren't necessarily what, priorities for the village, what should be done first, then second and third. They're actually items, it's more of the time frame, for implementing some of these recommendations. Some recommendations are very easy. They can be actually implemented in about a week or in a year. Other recommendations are, like the Altenheim, could take 10, 15 years to implement, to achieve. Priority 1, the recommendations that are listed under that category are recommendations that we anticipate will be implemented or can be implemented in 1 to 5 years. Priority 2, 5 to 10 years, and then priority 3, 10 years and above. We also recommended to make sure that the document doesn't just sit on the shelf. Bob and I had a conversation earlier that we want to make sure that this is an active plan, that it does get implemented. So we recommended the formation of an implementation task force. And the task force could be made up of plan commission members, village staff, residents, the business community, and other key stakeholders in the community. And that group of individuals will look at the plan periodically and monitor the progress of the implementation of the action items. If items are not moving forward, then this group would develop a plan to, try to get things, items going, some of the recommendations actually going. As far as financing the plan, we did identify, it's in addendum E, we identified some funding sources for the recommendations. And the village will need to be monitoring these sources of funding on a consistent basis, and then submitting applications, for the grants and the funding. Kudos to Forest Park. Forest Park has done a great job in getting out there and getting state and federal funds. They've been very competitive in the funding arena. So this is just a continuation of what they're already doing. I just want to mention too that implementation isn't just all on the village of Forest Park. It takes partnerships and coordination with surrounding communities and partnerships within the village also. In the action agenda, it does describe the participants for all of these goals, people, agencies, organizations that need to come together to actually achieve the recommendations and the goals and objectives.
So what's next? Tim kind of described the rest of the process before we started today, but I want to go through that with you a little bit again. Tonight we were here to really present this draft document to you, to get your thoughts and ideas. We had some good dialogue here this evening, so I appreciate that. It's important that you take this document now and look at it further. We have comment forms here today. If anybody has something else that they didn't have the opportunity to bring up to us that they would like us to consider with the document, you can fill out a comment form and leave it with us this evening. You can also go to the project website, pictureforestpark.net, and leave a comment online. As Tim mentioned, if you'd like to email him, Joellen, or you can send an email to myself, we want to hear your comments. We want to take those and incorporate them into the final document. Our plan is to come back to you on November 17th for adoption of the plan, and we hope to have at that time for you a list of the comments that we received regarding the draft plan and how we've addressed those comments, so that you don't have to sit there with the document saying, what's different, let me compare it page by page. We want to be able to give something to you so that you can see any additional changes that were made in the document that you have in your hands today. After that meeting, we'll be taking it to the Village Council on November 24th for their first look at the document. We'll be doing a presentation similar but yet scaled back than we're doing today. And then we'll bring it back with any comments they have, bring it back to them for review and approval at their meeting on December 15th. that, thank you all very much. We appreciate you coming out today. The kudos really go to you because you've spent a lot of time, you come to our meetings, we send these notices out, we get participation, you commented on the website. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the board being involved. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Just one last thing, folks, if you put your email down on here, whether you're on a reservation list or not, I'll make sure you get all the comments that were made tonight. When you come in Harlem, the buildings are top, right down the side, just said, welcome to the park.